going to join us. So this morning, as announced in the newsletter, Bill is going to tell about places he and Karen have been that, I guess, Bible lands, the Holy Land, and other places they've been where they're been to places that are talked about in the Bible, and that is a significant thing to do. I remember when usually the Baptist preachers, when I was growing up in Divine, one or two of them would go to the Holy Land and show their slides when they came back, and people would gather around, and they weren't even Baptists would come. So it was a kind of a magical thing to know that somebody had really been to the Holy Land. So, Bill, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Bill. This is actually part 2 of my spiritual journey. Earlier this summer, I gave part 1, which is kind of about my evolution as a young person to the current day and the various stops along the way that has brought me to Covenant. What I didn't mention is experiences in the last few years that have really deepened my understanding and further moved me to what I believe. When I retired in 2016, Karen and I made the commitment to continue learning. And one of the things I certainly wanted to learn about was the background of the Bible and certainly how it would affect my faith. So in 2017, we took the opportunity to join some of our friends at Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church in a tour of Israel. And then in 2018, we did a similar tour with many of the same friends to Greece with a side trip to Rome to follow Paul. I have thousands of slides from those experiences, and I promise you I'm not going to show any of them. What I would like to show you are some that were meaningful to me that really have informed my spiritual journey. And I'd like to tell a few stories about that. Again, trying to link it to how I understand the Bible and what it means to me. As I said to Karen, I am very grateful for Covenant and for the Education Committee to allow me to indulge in this experiment, because I'm trying to put together 2 things, my feelings about spiritual things and vacation slides, which one by themselves may be problematic. So I hope I can express this in the way I intend, and I give some pleasure and learning to you as well. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that? I have entitled this presentation, Encountering the Bible in Israel. Of the many, many slides I have, I decided that I'm going to stay with Israel this time. And what I have here are some personal reflections through my iPhone camera. And in each case, again, I'd like to tell you about kind of the feelings that they have evoked in me, and maybe some description of these very interesting pictures. This first picture, of course, is the iconic image of the city of Jerusalem as taken from the Mount of Olives. The dominant feature there, of course, is the Muslim Al-Aqsa Mosque, the so-called Dome of the Rock. The other white buildings are the old city of Jerusalem in the background, the modern city of Jerusalem. This view from the Mount of Olives would be very much similar to what Jesus saw when he came from the Mount of Olives. And this gate here in the right here, if you can see that, is said to be the very gate that Jesus passed through on the donkey during his Palm Sunday entry into Jerusalem. The reason it's sealed, it has been sealed a long time. It was sealed in 1541 by one of the Ottoman emperors. You can see there the wall of the old city, and right in front of that are thousands and thousands of graves. All people who wish to be buried, anticipating the resurrection, right next to the old city. This image in itself, this iconic image, really for me invokes the phrase, these are our sacred stories. This whole area is full of those sacred stories, and they are also powerful. None is more powerful than the one I'd like to mention first. But first of all, let me give you a little orientation. This is the country of Israel, which I would say is a very small geographic area with a big narrative. Israel is surrounded by 4 countries, almost 5. You can see Lebanon and Syria in the north, Jordan on the east, Egypt on the west. And if you go down to the very bottom, almost Saudi Arabia. If you take, Karen and I took a little glass bottom boat tour out of the resort city of Eilat, and you don't go out very far, and there you see the shore of Saudi Arabia. The distances, as I mentioned, are very small. To give you an example, the international airport is located here in Tel Aviv. And on the last day we were there, we took a bus from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. That's about 40 miles, not much farther than driving from our house to George Bush Intercontinental Airport. A small country with a big narrative and powerful narratives. And this is the first one that I would like to show you. And for me, this is indicative of the intractable tensions that beset the Middle East. And it goes like this. Karen and I had decided to take a side trip before our tour with the church group began. And we joined with 4 other people from that group to organize a side trip to the World Heritage Site of Petra. Let me go back to the map. Petra is right here. It's in Jordan. And those of you familiar with it, it is a marvelous combination of geology, history, and and civilization. It is well worth seeing, and I'll show you a few pictures in a minute. But to get there, you have to cross an international border between Israel and Jordan. Fortunately, there is one. It is the Yitzhak Rabin on the Israeli side international border crossing, and it was set up in 1993 during one of the periodic peace negotiations in the Middle East. This one, the so-called Oslo Accords. It was set up for best intentions, and it is still operating today, but not with really the spirit, I think, an international crossing should. The way it works, if you want to go to Petra from Israel, you engage a guide who will drive you right up to the front door, but not go in there with you. You go in a long building, a very long building, and you make 3 stops. The first stop is to present your credentials to the Israeli authorities, who ask you all sorts of questions. Why you were there, what are you bringing with you, who you have talked to, etc. And of course, the example is, I have my sunglasses and my baseball cap on. I'm a tourist. I'm going to Petra. You stamp a page, you go to the next table in the middle of the building, which is all fraught with the complexities of the Middle East, because this table is neither the Israelis or the Jordanians, it is the Palestinians. And they ask you a similar set of questions and stamp another paper with you, which you insert in your pocket to have for the way back. And finally, you get to the end of the building, and there are the Jordanian authorities who make no acknowledgement of your previous pieces of paper and complete it again. And then comes the experience. One emerges into this area where Karen and I are standing right now. Now you notice I am holding Karen kind of tightly. There are 3 reasons for that. The first reason is we are soulmates, and that will never change. The second reason is it was a little chilly. You can see the flags blowing in the background. But the third and most powerful reason is this is truly what one would describe as a no man's land. Neither Karen and I can explain to this day the feeling of emptiness, the feeling of quiet, and the feeling of we are nowhere with no contact. There is no signage there. There are no loudspeakers telling us what to do. We are dispatched on our own. I think we were with some of the people we were traveling with, hence the picture. But this is a place completely without reference to anything. And I would say this is the loneliest and the most isolated we have ever felt. It was such an eerie feeling. And I came to understand there that maybe this is the real problem with the Middle East and all those that argue over the issues such as who was God's promise for? Whose land is this? You know, in a normal dispute, you at least acknowledge your opponent and you outline your differences. This is not happening here. And that's an experience, almost a spiritual experience, I'll take with me to this day. And it was actually very frightening to be there, but I'm glad it was, because this imparted powerful understanding on me. Genesis 12, and one of the strange part of it, this is the very place. This is the very place where God said to Abraham, I will make you a great nation, and you will be blessed to be a blessing. It would be such a good thing if some of those blessings would come to that very land itself. Now, having said that, we did depart through the gates in the back into the country of Jordan, where a very, very nice tour guide left us, greeted us, and we proceeded to Jordan, to Petra. Now, since I mentioned Petra, I'll give some pictures here. And I would say this is one of the, if not the most powerful tourist experience that I ever had. This is an unmatched combination of geology, history, and the sense of the activity of the ancient world. Petra, as you might know, and you might see from some Indiana Jones movies, is a civilization that was built in sandstone caverns in Jordan. And the majority of your touring around Petra are through these giant caverns in the earth, sometimes so narrow you can reach out with either hand and feel them. And the culmination of this experience is you emerge at the end to this iconic site called the Treasury. That is not a building there, that is a carving in sandstone, carved out by those ancient artists. You can see by the architectural influences, this is very much influenced by Greek and Roman architecture, which gives you positive evidence that this was such an active trading site. And so one appreciates what was going on at the time of the Bible. This was contemporaneous with the Bible times. Actually, there is some stories that Paul might have spent some time here prior to beginning his ministry. As one goes to Petra, one sees some of the most amazing geography one ever sees, and a further appreciation of some of the stories in the Bible. This is Mount Or, which is the resting place of Aaron. This is one of the places where the ancient Israelites wandered. And when they say they wandered in the wilderness, this is the wilderness. One has an appreciation to what they faced, and the experience again is very spiritual. A very personal experience for me took place in the city of Jaffa. After going to Petra, we returned to Tel Aviv, where we were waiting for our tour group to begin the official tour of Israel. Jaffa is simply a suburb of Tel Aviv. In fact, Karen and I walked from our hotel in Tel Aviv over here to Jaffa. One of the things we talked about at the time was some decisions we had to make, especially church decisions about change and about commitment. Memorial Drive Presbyterian Church at the time was about to change denominations, to leave the Presbyterian Church USA and over the issues of inclusiveness that I talked about in my prior spiritual journey. We talked about that. We talked about change in general. All the while, we were encouraging Jaffa, which I have to say is nothing but change. Here you can see the port of Jaffa, where, as the story goes, God changed Jonah's mind, retrieving him when he tried to flee from God's instructions to warn the people of Nineveh. As we were walking along this beach here, we again encountered two of the people that we had also gone to Petra with, and they told us, "Have you seen the house of Simon the Tanner?" Now, I am a little embarrassed to say, at the time, the phrase Simon the Tanner was a little bit familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. Fortunately, Google works all over the world, and I realized Simon the Tanner was in a major biblical site. So Karen and I walked down here, walked through some narrow alleys, and came upon a vision, only us. Once again, everything is very quiet, to this house of Simon the Tanner, which was nothing less than the site where Peter was staying, dreaming dreams, one of which was God telling Peter, "Here are all the animals. Do not regard as unclean what God has made clean, and eat." And out of this came the whole decision to let the Gentiles into the faith and to change those dietary laws to make that possible. That was a very profound experience for me, and I realized that this is not about doing what was done before. The Bible says move forward, be accepting. And at the same time I was thinking that, the call to prayer began from this mosque right up here. So I was standing there with these thoughts about Peter, with these thoughts about history, and these thoughts about diversity, and it was quite a joyous spiritual experience. As I said in my prior spiritual journey, that kind of helped us lead to many experiences that eventually brought us to covenant. By the way, all that thinking about Peter and unclean animals and clean animals actually made us hungry. So we had lunch, which brings me to another point I'd like to make. If you ever go to that part of the world, the fruits and vegetables are incredible. I never thought that I would be raving about a cucumber, and I did that day. And one of the things I'd like to point out about the modern as well as the ancient history of this part of the world is that water is everything. This is a very arid region, and especially in the state of Israel, the supply of water is not guaranteed. The Jordan River runs north to south, but it's always subject to being cut off by their adversaries. And in itself, it is not a very robust river. So what you see around the state of Israel, when you look at the agricultural lands, are things like this. This is a field of strawberries, all covered in plastic, with little cutouts so the tops can stick out. And this is a water conservation measure. This is also fraught with all sorts of technology, water sensors, and so on. It is really an amazing demonstration of technology. And as I said, the cucumbers are fantastic. This is one of the vegetable drinks that Karen is so fond of, and I would say it is wonderful. I'd also note that water and water technology is nothing new in those lands. The area is covered with Roman aqueducts, Roman roads, and Roman structures, all which says this area, at the time the Bible characters were there, was just a robust area of change and of technology. This is another very powerful experience. The Bible is full of conflict and it's full of war, and we've read about that all the time. And in my other travels, I've gone to many museums that have told about war. In fact, later that summer, we took a tour and visited some of the United States Civil War battlefields. But this is the only place where, as a tourist, I viewed an actual war. And I said that experience of being on the border between Israel and Jerusalem was surreal. This was equally strange, because what you do, you are tourists. You walk up a path. On the right, there is some barbed wire, and don't go over that barbed wire because there are all sorts of signs like this. That is a minefield. Many of those mines dating from the 1967 and 73 mines. Who knows how stable they are? But here we are, tourists passing them. We reach the top, and there's a UN observer with very, very powerful binoculars observing at this time the war in Syria. And so are we. You can hear the rumbling of the cannon. You can see the smoke coming out, all the while you're chit-chatting with your neighbors and even with the UN observer. As I remember, he was a general from Holland and more than happy to talk to us. And so you have a situation where in front of you is a violent war, and in back of you, if you turn around, is a parking lot with many, many tour buses. There is just something not right about that. And there's something that really kind of destroys hope. War is a tourist activity. And what are we coming to? But I would say there is one thing, this is on the Golan Heights, looking over to Syria, that really did give me hope. And that's this next slide here. Some unknown welder, probably dating back to the 1967 war, took all the pieces of destruction. These are little parts from shattered military devices and so on. And improbably, it looks here like a golf club, and welded them together. These are all over the place, just sitting there, not arranged, probably where this fellow left them. And immediately it brought to mind Isaiah 2:4, and they should beat their swords into plowshares, or in this case, whimsical pieces of art. This gave me hope, and this gave me hope for all of us who are facing all these problems in the world and keeping hope. I think of these whimsical figures all the time. One of the things that also gave me some hope and confidence is the observation that, you know what? Sometimes all those Sunday school leaflets do paint an accurate picture. This is a view from the Sea of Galilee, and this is exactly how I had envisioned it. You know, in Mark 4:36, it says, when evening came, Jesus told his disciples, let us go over to the other side. And this is probably something like he was looking at. Now, one of the bucket list questions I had gone to Israel with is, how big really is the Sea of Galilee? Well, being an engineer, here are the numbers. If you are familiar with Lake Conroe, the Sea of Galilee is just about exactly twice as large. If you know Lake Livingston, it is about half of large. It is a big lake. It can have some violent weather, and it's dotted with these little towns all along the shore. You can see the hills going up, and when it talks about Jesus climbing up the hill, either to preach to the crowds or to seclude himself for some prayer, this is what it looked like. One can easily place yourself in the shoes of at least the historical Jesus. Jesus was among the people. Jesus was seeking solitude, and the Sea of Galilee to me is exactly what I had imagined it to be. At this point in the Sea of Galilee, there was right around here, there was an archaeological discovery, and this was another very profound spiritual moment for me. This, if you've heard or seen pictures of it, is the so-called Jesus boat. Lots of stories about Jesus being on the boat or the disciples fishing. This is about the size. This boat was discovered about 2 decades ago. It was buried in the muck where there was a lack of oxygen, and therefore this is wood. It was preserved. Now, we had some conversation with our very knowledgeable guide, which gave me some real insight about how to think about this boat. And what he said is, these little villages at the time of Jesus were very, very small. And they were lucky to have a boat, and if so, just one. There were not very many villages. There were not very many people. So if Jesus were not on this boat, he probably saw it. And so I'm sitting here looking at this boat, which could have been a tangible connection to Jesus. And all those sacred stories came back to me. And they are sacred. And Jesus was a person who was a working person, and all those stories are something that are really to be cherished. As you can see, as I look at this, I get very reflective and almost very emotional. And that was one of the real gifts that the trip to the reasons gave me. I haven't talked about becoming reflective or even emotional. I want to present this slide as my mystical moment. Tim Wegner is going to give the proclamation today, and I believe he's going to talk about some of those mystical moments. Those are ones that it's just you, it's just the message, and if ever the Spirit talks to you, it's during these moments. This is a place on the Sea of Galilee. This is a natural outcrop, and it is said during the time of Jesus, the Sea of Galilee was higher, so this actually formed a natural dock that could walk out to the sea. And as the sacred story goes, this is the dock where the risen Christ walked out, hailed the disciples who had gone back to fishing. And as you remember the story, they finally recognized Jesus' voice. They scrambled back, and they went back here to the back where Jesus cooked them breakfast, the breakfast of fish. In an answer to Peter's question, "Do you love me?" Jesus said 3 times, "Feed my sheep." Now, this is a major tourist area. All these areas in Israel are full of tourists. There must have been hundreds of people around here. But at this moment, when I looked at this, it was just me. It was just me contemplating the risen Christ and contemplating his instructions, feed my sheep. At that point also, the passage from James came to me. just don't read the Bible. Do what it says. And this one, the risen Christ going out on the dock, not just to be seen, but to look for the disciples and bring them back. And the message he gave, feed my sheep, was a very powerful one and shapes a lot about my spiritual journey. And so thank you for looking at that picture, and thank you for hearing this message, because it certainly was a very powerful one for me. This equally is the Garden of Gethsemane. Now we're in Jerusalem. Once again, many tourists here. But when one stands here and looks at these olive trees, one can really place oneself in the garden. Interesting scientific fact, these olive trees have been carbon dated, and they date exactly back to the time of Christ. These were probably much smaller when Jesus was praying on the night before his crucifixion. But once again, when one considers the sacred stories of the Bible, one must conclude these are very sacred. And these very much, I don't know about the actual details. I don't know about who did what. Maybe some of the stories were embellished, but the sacredness here really comes through. One of the other stories I have that maybe is the opposite of sacred comes when we toured the old city of Jerusalem. Now, in this case, I would like to say expectations or results did not quite measure up to expectations. I had expected that the Jerusalem Old City would be a very pious place, and once again, a very sacred place. And what I found was the New Orleans French Quarter. The Old City is actually divided into 4 quarters: the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter, another part of the Christian quarter. One rounds the corner, however, and you see that somehow another faction has come into the old city. And there it is. This is probably the biggest shock of my trip to the Holy Land. In this shop, if you have a college team, you can find the sweatshirt or the t-shirt in either Arabic, Hebrew, or English. A big disappointment to me, to say the least. I'm going to finish this round of slides with 2 more. And they also go back to understanding the Bible, to putting ourselves in the shoes of those who walked here. The first one is an archaeological site that was unearthed right after the 1967 war. This is said to be the temple court. When we read about Jesus overturning the tables and saying, "My house shall be a house of prayer, not a house of commerce," this is the place where it took place. When one stands there, one can just imagine the busy commerce going on, the numbers of people there, and the commotion that took place when an agitated Jesus started doing that. I'm going to close too with a close-up on these rocks right here, because these rocks are nothing less than those rocks, the original rocks that were thrown down in AD 78 when the Romans sacked the temple. Jesus said, these stones will be thrown down, and here they are. Now, the interpretation here is mine and mine only, but as I looked at these, the thing I noticed, this was the spring, this was March, were these little flowers growing right here. And to me, that was a very powerful message that the stones will be thrown down, but they will be built up, and there will be life. And that life is signified by those flowers. And so I'm going to leave this presentation here with that one word, hope, in the comment that I think that is what discovering these sacred stories gives us. It's not about verifying historical accuracy. It's not by putting faces to places or even events to places. It is, I think, validating our understanding of those spiritual stories and the hope that it gives us. So I'm gonna stop here with the pictures. If anybody's interested, the statistics on my iPhone says I have 435 of them from Israel alone. You're happy to come over here and we can have dinner and I can show you any number of them. But I'm going to stop here, leave this in my spiritual journey, and hopefully maybe we can have some reaction or discussion, because these are our sacred stories. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to present them. So I'm going to stop my share, and thank you again.
Oh.
Thank you, and thanks be to God for those sacred stories. That was really, really good, Bill. Just so interesting, so also inspiring.
Way to go, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. One of the, just an aside, one of the other stories that is so fascinating about the area that I've kind of put together is a technology story. When you go over there, as I mentioned, you can see all sorts of aqueducts, and you can see evidence of the technology of the day. Today, our technology is driven by information technology, the internet, satellites, etc. In those days, the technology was driven by what possibly was the premier invention, maybe of all time, and that's the Roman arch. That allowed structures to be built, aqueducts to be built, and in turn, roads and all of that. And that's all around you. You can see evidence of pipes and plumbing and all those things. And that's a fascinating story as well.
Bill, you made some great observations about war. And I don't want to take us off point, but as we speak, a 20-year American war is coming to an end. America's hightailing it out. Kabul is about to fall, and things, I suspect, will return as they were 20 years ago with Taliban running Afghanistan. And, war, what's it good for? So
that's right.
Exactly. I just had to say something about, I remember those images in April of 1975 of people fleeing off the top of the American embassy in Saigon. Exactly. And we're kind of in one of those moments. And wars are just a terrible thing. And I'm glad we kind of as a congregation are opposed.
Exactly.
Yep.
And John, that takes me back to the experience I had in no man's land between Israel and Jordan. The tragic thing there is nobody talks to each other. Nobody talks. Negotiations were attempted, a complete failure. We are withdrawing, a complete vacuum. No negotiations. No talk about objectives. It just returns, and that is the tragedy. I think that's the tragedy. Is not only having differences, not even having anger, but a complete failure to acknowledge that the other side exists. is to me the depth of the emptiness there. And that and conducting these things in full view. Like I said, I'm on the Golas Heights and we're looking at a tourist war. My goodness.
Tim, you had your hand up.
Yeah, Bill, your presentation reminded me of an experience Susan and I had. We were living in Egypt and we decided to visit Israel, and we got on a bus and we went there. And, you know, we're curious people. We had this brochure that said all these different things we could go to, and there was a talk on something or other. So, well, we'll go to the talk. So we went to this place where the talk was, and we were the only people there, plus the speaker. And he thought about it, and then he decided he would go ahead. Now, you didn't mention this, but the site of the temple is now am I got this right? The Dome of the Rock Mosque?
Yeah, the Solomon's Temple, the west wall of the Solomon's Temple is kind of like the foundation of the mosque.
So
yeah.
The topic of this talk was the temple would be rebuilt.
Oh.
And the guy didn't say it in so many words. That implies tear down the Dome of the Rock Mosque and build the temple.
Yeah.
And he gave this presentation and it was sort of stunning. It was this guy talking to two of us. And then when it was over, there was somebody who had been lurking around the room who had overheard it, came in and said, please, not everybody here believes that.
Yes.
But wow, I mean, that was really something to hear that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that also evokes once again my standing in this no man's land border, but also Genesis 12 verses 1-3, blessed to be a blessing. Kind of the implication there is the end times will come when the temple is restored, the mosque is torn down, Jesus comes again, and the blessing of God through Abraham will be fulfilled. And I don't know. I don't think everybody believes that, nor do I. I believe the blessings of God come to me, and that is me. I am blessed, and I am blessed to be a blessing. But if you think that destiny is tearing down the temple, destiny is the triumph of the line of Abraham, I don't know. I don't accept that.
Karen?
Just saying that reminds me of the impression I had when we were on this tour. The tour guide that we had was Jewish, and he was, in order to be a tour guide in Israel, you have to go through this very strenuous testing to show that you know your facts and all that. But it was really, really clear to us as we went through the tour that he was giving us the Israeli version of history and the Israeli view of all these sites. And I remember remarking at the end of the trip to Bill, I said, I would like to take this trip again with a Palestinian tour guide and get that perspective, because I think it would be totally different. And I think that unless we are willing to explore multiple viewpoints, then we are going to end up with that view of war that leads us to not talking and not negotiating. And so anyway, I just think that whole area, probably any area that you go and look at historically, if you can look at it from multiple perspectives, you're going to get a much more accurate picture.
When you said you'd been traveling through the Civil War sites, I think that would hold true there too.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
right.
Yes.
Sally, you had your hand up a while ago.
I was just wondering what it was like to come back to the reality of your lives here. Trip.
One of the things I remarked as we were leaving, I told some friends, we're leaving a place where a Crusader castle is so recent, it's really not worth mentioning historically. To come back to a city where our oldest ruin is the Houston Astrodome. So there is sort of a different perspective. But I would also say, I think we come back equipped. I mean, when we face all the issues we have about inclusiveness and about racism and about even environmental change, those ancient people faced those as well. Water, they were struggling to exist. Wandering in the wilderness, what that is really the wilderness. And I think they have a lot to teach us about that and about perseverance and about it's always about change. I'll just make one other observation about about a month ago, I was reading the accounts of the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting and the various posturing going on there. And the head of the most conservative faction made the famous statement, "Our Lord is not woke." When I read that, I was immediately turned to my picture of Jaffa, where Peter is being told to ignore the dietary laws, and Jonah is being retrieved for the purpose God gave him. And the Muslim call to prayer is going on. And I thought, this fellow that says our Lord is not woke has never been to Jaffa. And so I guess it's all your point of view, but that was mine.
Thank you so much.
That's a good place to stop here. And that was just wonderful for Bill and for Karen, who was there too. And added to that. That just so good. We will certainly urge everyone to watch this.